right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, this is going to be a tough one to figure out what inspired this because we are doing a Missing Pieces episode going back to 2006's Southland Tales from Richard Kelly. This movie, what inspired this? Oh boy, we have got quite the conversation in store for you guys. Returning to the show is filmmaker Joe Black, who he picked this one and he has a lot to say about it. And we get into a lot with this one. It's a fun one. So before we get into the conversation, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you're subscribed to Piecing It Together on your podcast app of choice. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And of course, join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all these movies. And I'm sure there will be plenty of conversations over the years forever about Southland Tales, because this is the movie that kind of keeps on giving in a way. But anyway, let's get into this conversation because, like I said, it's a long one and we have a lot to say about this movie. All right, so back on the show with us today, we are going to finally get Joe Black on one of these Missing Pieces episodes. Joe, how's it going, man?
I'm doing very well. Very busy, but very well. How about yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am busy too. We if nothing else, we are keeping busy during these crazy times, aren't we?
Yeah, I'm busier than ever in an odd way.
It really feels that way sometimes. But yeah, we've been talking about doing this one since I first started the Missing Pieces series. And when I put the idea out there into the Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces group and just messaging people who had been on the show in the past, you suggested Southland Tales. And somehow I had never seen this movie. I am really happy I now can say, if nothing else, I have seen this movie.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of this movie. I saw it when it came out. I was working at Blockbuster at the time, and we got these graphic novels in advance for this thing called Southland Tales, and I didn't know that. I just thought we were getting graphic novels, and then a week later the DVD showed up, and I was like, "What is this? What is this?" And nobody seemed to gel with it the way that I did, and even online, like it's hard to find like videos about the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or think pieces about the movie. So when you were saying you were doing this, I was like, oh man, what I would give to hear a podcast on Southland Tales.
Sure. Well, before we get into puzzle pieces and all that stuff, I do think after watching this movie, it's a lot. And I was kind of telling you before we started recording, I do wish I had seen it multiple times. I especially wish I saw it back then. This came out 2006, I believe, and I feel like this is the kind of crazy that I would have absolutely connected with when it came out in 2006. I would have been like, whoa, this is awesome. Watching it now, I don't know, a little exhausted watching it. It's a lot to take in. There's just so much going on, but that being said, like I already said, I'm really happy I finally got to see this thing, and I think we're just going to have so much to talk about. I think this is going to be a fun conversation. There's going to be so many things to discuss during this movie. I think we might as well just get into some puzzle pieces, and we'll talk about all the things along the way. We'll start off, of course, with our going backwards, what movies may have inspired Southland Tales. What do you have for your first piece?
Okay, I wanted to kind of ease us into the idea of what the movie is about. You know what I mean? So my first puzzle piece was RoboCop 2.
Okay.
Not the first one, the second one. Specifically about like a drug epidemic changing the consciousness of a society in dystopia. You know what I mean? Southland Tales was set. It's weird. It wasn't even quite like set in the future. It was set like 2 years in the future at the time that it was made. But it's a totally radically different future with different outcomes to everything. And there's a new fuel source being built, a hydrogen fuel source called liquid karma. But that fuel source can also be extracted and turned into a drug, which is getting like it's basically the drug is being used by the government to oppress keep the rebellion down, basically, to keep them
Sure.
oppressed. It's how they're fight. It's how the government's winning on both ends in the movie. And like RoboCop 2, which I thought was, I actually think that movie gets a bad rap. I think that the first RoboCop is brilliant, but the second one I think is in its own way just as brilliant.
Hmm.
That it is about how narcotics in general are used as a propaganda tool by the government of something that needs to be stopped, but simultaneously used by the government as something to keep people suppressed.
Sure. Very, very, very key, important thing to talk about this particular week.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, what do you know?
Yeah.
Southland Tales and RoboCop 2 ahead of their time. But but even more than just like specifically the drug influence, I also think that what both all the RoboCops, but also Southland Tales do very brilliantly is they manage these films are satire. You know
Sure.
what I mean? But satire doesn't necessarily mean like spoof or you know what I mean, like flat out like silly. But
Sure.
I mean, but like that is a way to like be inviting into what you're trying to express is to be like self-aware and to have a certain levity and sincerity about yourself. You know what I mean? Where you're not afraid to be kind of silly.
Hmm.
Um, like I love the scene in Southland Tales when the government is raiding the their hideout, the rebels hideout, and they kill a guy on a toilet, and then they shoot another guy with a shotgun, and he flies into a giant toilet statue. You know what I mean? It's
That was straight slapstick.
yeah, like that's what, but like it's still a very powerful and effective moment, leading to Sean William Scott passing out on top of the building and landing in a dumpster. Like it's
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's very funny. Did you recognize that the guy who gets shot on the toilet was Eli Roth?
I did. I
Mhm.
100% did. Yeah. I was like, wait a
Yeah.
minute. I think that was fucking Eli Roth. And I went and looked it up.
Yeah. But yeah, I really appreciated the satirical edge that the movie had. Um, but I'll get into that in my next puzzle piece.
Okay.
So
All right. Well, the only thing I have to say about RoboCop 2, a great puzzle piece to kick it off. I don't really remember the plot that well. I think I actually saw that in the theater. I
mhm.
was really young, and the only thing I remember is doesn't a brain get squashed at one point?
Well, the drug dealer becomes a giant brain with eyeballs,
Gotcha.
Kane, and yes, he does. It's yeah. Then that brain gets put inside of the RoboCop 2, and,
Hmm.
and then RoboCop like busts it open and smashes
There
it.
you
It's
go.
pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that memory is imprinted on me. I love that moment. That was great. Haven't seen it though since back then.
I got to meet the director of it once, Ivan Kershner, who did he also did The Empire Strikes Back. And
Right.
I was doing an internship and he was teaching us about like movie trailers or something like that. He was very old at the time. But we had
Uh,
to cut together a trailer for footage from Star Trek the Motion Picture, like make a trailer for it. And I did
hmm.
it really fast and then he came to look at it and then at the end I was like, "What do you think?" And he goes, "The cuts don't feel inspired." And I went, "Inspired? Dude, you made RoboCop 2." Like, I didn't realize that but he just, like, looked at me and then started laughing, and I was, like, almost puked. I was so nervous 'cause I felt so bad because I love RoboCop 2. I was just joking.
Oh, the poor guy.
Yeah.
Uh,
RIP.
yeah. Well, I will go on to my next piece then, and let's see, what should I kick it off with? I guess I'll kick it off with a little They Live. That's
Mhm.
come up on the show before, but I think there's like a whole underlying current of these like elite and this real world of what what they know is true and what they're feeding the public, and a lot of very weird like technology and a lot of very and that's going to permeate a lot of my other pieces as well, the weird technology and
Mhm.
futurism and everything going on in the movie. But I think mainly though with They Live, it's just that idea of the elite knows what's going on and everyone else is being controlled. Everybody else has blinders on as far as what's really happening within the country, and just that whole political satire element of the whole thing and setting up all this weird sci-fi to tell a very of the moment, very real story that ends up mirroring so much of the real world, even though it feels so crazy as it's playing out.
I see. I've always had a draw to the movie They Live. I have
Hmm.
never been able to finish it though because how do I put this? Hate it. I don't know how to put it. I I think that first of all, I mean, for anyone listening, I have to preface this by saying I don't like any John Carpenter movies.
Ooh.
I don't care for his work. That isn't to say that I think his movies are bad. I mean, most of them I do think are bad, but I just don't care for his work. You know what I mean? I don't.
Hmm.
I like the characters in Big Trouble in Little China. That's about it.
Mm.
Um, but my problem with They Live, and this isn't even a criticism, is that it's just so on the nose. Like, it's so on the nose, and it's
It's
so
super on the nose.
yeah, but it also is so, like, clearly making a statement that I have to question it. It has to be wrong, in my opinion. There's something about it that, like it's like, "No, that's too easy." You know what I mean? I think it's too easy for filmmakers, especially very successful filmmakers who get blank checks to make their movies like he did at the time or whatever,
Hmm.
to, say, "See? See what they're doing to you?" It's like, "Dude, you are they." You
Right,
know what I
right.
mean? Adam McKay does the same shit, which we talked about with the greed thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
But, what I love so much about Southland Tales is that I think that what Southland Tales is about how confused we were all becoming by all of this influence. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like it's literally about the chaos that comes from all these different sources of influence, especially showing how media was shifting more into celebrity. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like this is pre-Kardashian when he made this movie, and yet you've got Kristen Now, like you
Yeah,
know, like saying, she's becoming a Paris Hilton influencer. She's an influencer before Instagram or Facebook. You know what I mean?
totally. Yeah.
Um, and The Rock being like the key to like this senator, getting elected president. Like The Rock is an actor in it and
Yeah,
then
it's so now.
right, right. And so like I think what I appreciated about Southland Tales versus what I don't care for in They Live is that like again, They Live is so direct and so like accusatory when Southland Tales is more it's more of a quest. It's more of a you're searching for meaning and what it means to you, you know?
Right.
Another thing I don't Southland Tales is very confusing, especially the first time you watch it. I was wondering, did you get that Justin Timberlake, his character, for those if you haven't seen the film, is um is a Iraq war vet who sits on top of a gunner on top of the Santa Monica Pier, protecting the borders of the Liquid Karma um, reactor that was built right off the Santa Monica Pier.
Mhm.
Did you get that he was supposed to be a famous actor who was drafted into the Iraq War?
No, I did
Yeah,
not.
see, it's hard to pick up on the first time, but that's
Yeah, there's so many little details, like,
hmm
it's crazy.
well, I when I saw it, I was like, how do you not? Which this can feed into my next puzzle piece if you want,
Okay.
which was Star Wars.
Sure.
Because this Southland Tales, the movie, starts with chapter 4.
Mhm.
It's
I
chapters
noticed
4,
that.
5, and 6. Chapters 1, 2, and 3 were this graphic novel that he produced beforehand, um, which explains a lot of the backstory to these people. And I remember seeing the movie for the first time being like, I'm confused and I know everything. You know what I mean? Like, because I
Right.
read the book.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, Justin Timberlake's character was a famous actor who got drafted into the Iraq War. So he was like a celebrity, soldier who
Mhm.
then Sean William Scott and he were buddies. I don't know if you got this from it. He and Sean William Scott were buddies, and Sean William Scott accidentally set off a grenade that blew up Justin Timberlake's face and
Holy shit, there I no, I did not.
that's why he has all those scars on his face.
Sure.
And that's why he's become a drug addict too. And just Sean William Scott never forgave himself for it. And to the drugs, what they don't explain necessarily in this version of the movie, they explain it a little better in the canned cut, but the canned cut is not as good as the final cut. Because originally,
Mhm.
for those listening, Richard Kelly made a cut of this movie in time for the Cannes Film Festival that was like almost 10 minutes longer, and things are all moved around in different orders. Like the guy getting his hand cut off is actually like the beginning of the Cannes cut.
Yeah, I heard that it's longer. I thought it was even more than 10 minutes longer, but actually explains less. It just throws you in the deep end even more.
Well, it actually it's different. It actually explains more, but just it's more confusing in the
Gotcha.
structure.
Okay.
The theatrical
Yeah.
cut is better, in my opinion.
Okay.
But Sean William Scott never forgave himself, and so when he takes what they don't explain in the theatrical cut is that liquid karma creates a psychic link between the red liquid karma between you and anyone else using it at the same time. So at the end of the film, when Sean William Scott takes the liquid karma, right, he is psychically linked to Justin Timberlake. So when he's in the ice cream truck, if anybody hasn't seen this movie and is listening to this, they're like, what are they talking
it's like,
about?
what the fuck? Yeah.
When they're in the ice cream truck, when Sean William Scott is shaking hands with his past self in the ice cream truck, he's actually talking to Justin Timberlake when he says, I forgive you.
So he's forgiving him through himself in a way.
Well, Justin Timberlake is forgiving him through himself. Like Justin Timberlake's like, I forgive you for what you did. Because past Sean William Scott's about to blow his brains out. Right? I have a theory that that's him becoming the Antichrist. That like that Justin Timberlake is so upset by like what's happened to the world and losing his celebrity and losing his fame, and now he's nothing but an addict who works for the fucking system, and he just wants to see it collapse. That he convinces Sean William Scott not to kill himself, because if The Rock is Christ, if The Rock is Christ at the end, when he holds out his hands on the Zeppelin as it's destroyed. If he's Christ, then Sean William Scott, who also went through the time warp, has to be the Antichrist if we're following the Book of Revelation, like Justin Timberlake's character is. So I think that's actually the creation of the Antichrist through forgiveness.
Jesus Christ, man!
Yeah. So
I like
Wars,
that though. Yeah, so like Star Wars,
it's chapters 4, 5, and 6 come first, because now Richard Kelly has announced that he's going to do a prequel movie that's half live action, half animated.
Yeah, I did have Star Wars on my list as well. I even as not a big Star Wars guy myself, I noticed the whole 4, 5, 6 thing, and then also just filled with so much political stuff. Star Wars is known for just packing it to the gills with political stuff, and
that's true. It's like it's like 4, 5, and 6, like the original trilogy, but instead it's like he made it like the prequel trilogy, but crammed it all into one movie.
Yeah. I gotta say, as crazy and like all over the place as that whole explanation just was, the time travel in this movie is a little easier to follow than some other movies.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
With the brilliant button with Kevin Smith, who also plays an Iraq war vet with no legs and a long wizard beard. I just love the way he explains it when they're explaining to The Rock that he went back in time and met his past self, and his past self killed himself. I love that Kevin Smith just screams at him, "You traveled through time, sir!" like any kind of like giddy geek would do,
Yeah, for sure.
And what's The Rock's famous line in that scene? "How could I kill myself? I'm a pimp, and pimps don't commit suicide."
Pimps definitely do not commit suicide. Yeah, that is quite the line. That's very memorable.
It's better in the theatrical cut, because in the Cannes cut they only say it once, and it's just kind of like, it's weird. The Cannes cut feels like fan service to the. It's a very odd experience watching that versus the theatrical cut. Like, I pity anybody who's only seen the Cannes cut.
Well, I'll go on to another piece. This one is a little bit cheating, because technically I had it on my list, and then I realized, oh shit, it came out the same year. It might have even been after, I'm not sure, but it is Mike Judge's Idiocracy. Another movie where celebrity and politics really blend together, and you get that very real, very now thing of celebrities having so much influence over the world of politics. And in both of these alternate future realities, everything has just gotten so dumb and weird
Right.
and just ridiculous. And then on top of that, you also get the corporate influence of the future, which is again very real feeling. And I feel like that's where we're going, where everything is sponsored by some corporate brand, product placement absolutely everywhere. And you get so much of that in Idiocracy and so much of that in Southland Tales. And if one wasn't influenced by the other, they certainly came from a similar headspace of where things were going.
Yeah, Hustler magazine advertising on the side of a tank in Southland Tales.
Absolutely.
Um, Idiocracy is another odd one that like I want to love it because I love Office Space, and even more than Office Space, I love Extract, and even
I
more than
couldn't get into Extract. I don't know why.
I
I got to
under
give it a chance
I
again
can
one day.
understand that. It's weird. Like that's an odd movie, and it's odd that I like it so much because infidelity is a touchy thing for me in movies. Like how they handle it,
Mm,
I think though is so honest that there's something really gripping about it. But I mean, nothing he's done, in my opinion, comes near to how transcendent Beavis and Butthead is.
oh,
Um,
the best.
it's one of my favorite things. Period. Is that show? But um, but Idiocracy is another one where like the idea felt incomplete to me. One
Mm,
thing that's really interesting to me about Idiocracy is that other than the president, there are like no minorities in that movie.
mm, that's
Y
interesting.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean? There are no gay characters, there's no, no there are only white characters in that movie, and then I guess Maya Rudolph too, you know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
but I think I got too distracted by that to really be able to get into it, to enjoy it, because 'cause I'm just uh like, is he did he not do it because he didn't wanna offend people, or is he trying to make a statement by doing that? But it
That's an
didn't.
interesting observation. I have to assume it was just a poor casting decision. I want to believe that, you know?
There are certain ideas though that I think that, like, are so good that I think that as a filmmaker, you have a responsibility to do them justice. Like, I that sounds so, like, self-righteous of me, you know what I mean? Like, but, like, movies like Groundhog Day, like,
Mhm.
I really don't care for that film because I feel like they gave the whitewash treatment to a really what could have been a really beautiful and affecting and equally as entertaining movie, you know?
Sure.
And Idiocracy, what I notice is that like that movie gets used a lot by people on the internet, especially talking about like, oh, here we go toward Idiocracy. You know, it has this little
Mhm.
cult following of, and um, and that's another thing to me that like I feel like Southland Tales does in its own kind of like subconscious way better. That like you can't really utilize Southland Tales as a weapon to make people like it's saying like, "Oh, it's like Southland Tales predicted." It's like, no, it's Southland Tales is dealing with something a little more complex within you, in your soul. You
Mm.
know, it's a very soulful film, you know what I mean? In that it's bringing science fiction and spirituality together, you
Yeah.
know? So and again, these aren't criticisms of Idiocracy, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
I just notice the way that people receive something like Idiocracy and they live versus, uh, the way that people flat out rejected something.
They sure did, man.
Yeah.
One thing before we move on to another piece, you're bringing up the soulfulness of the movie.
Mhm.
And one thing that I think would be maybe my biggest criticism of the movie, and maybe we'll see what you have to say about this. I feel like Richard Kelly believes in what he's making here 100%. And maybe it's because of the weird casting choices of getting like a lot of Saturday Night Live people and a lot of like action movie people, but I feel like the actors don't know what the fuck they're doing
Okay.
necessarily. And I'm not like totally saying that they're doing a bad job necessarily. I don't know that they believe they're in an particularly interesting political satire or whatever. I think that they're just like along for the ride in a way.
I think that it's actually, the exact opposite, but it's perfect
Okay.
you said Saturday Night Live because it feeds into my next thing, which was Saturday Night Live.
Okay, cool.
Because so much of this cast is pulled from not just one era, but many eras of Saturday Night Live. You've
Sure.
got uh, you got like John Lovitz, and you've got Sherry O'Terry. You've got what's her name, Nora Dunn. You've got you have all these different, and then you also have like the Mad TV people. You have Will Sasso. is in this movie.
Oh yeah, that's right.
What Richard Kelly, I think, kind of brilliantly did was most of these people, A, are television celebrities.
Mm.
Um, and B, they are people who starred in things that were kind of like tongue-in-cheek satire that were taken as sincere. People like Christopher Lambert, from Highlander. He took
Mhm.
these people and he made a very sincere project. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, and I think that these actors like Sherry O'Terry, I think Sherry O'Terry is brilliant in the movie. Or Sean
Mm.
William Scott, who at that point was literally just known as Stifler. You know what I
Sure.
mean? And The Rock, who was, a wrestler at the time. This is before he was Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Yeah, it's weird seeing him in this. Like you forget because now he's just like the biggest movie star in the world, basically, and like he is still the wrestler of The Rock in this.
Right. Well, see, what's beautiful too, Richard Kelly, I actually got to. So, like, one time I was in a video store, they still exist here in LA, and
Hmm.
somebody was asking for a recommendation, and I was just so happened to be standing next to Southland Tales, and I just
Hmm.
started going off on Southland Tales, being like, "Get this movie, blah blah blah," like for like 5 minutes. Then after like 5 minutes of me just like on a soapbox about it, this other dude pops his head from around the corner and goes, "Are you talking about Southland Tales?" And I said, "Yeah," and he's like, "I edited that movie." And I was like, "What?" So like I immediately befriended him. He edited all 3 of Richard Kelly's films. And he said that originally the idea for Southland Tales, which the original idea was it was like rollerbladers who like or skateboarders who were filming a skate video and accidentally witnessed an assassination, a political assassination or something like that, and we're going to use that to
Hmm.
blackmail the government or something. And that he watched the whole thing unfold and become what it was, and he's like, "I don't even know what it is." Um, Richard Kelly, as a filmmaker, all 3 of his films are kind of linked. I don't really care for Donnie Darko, but I love Southland Tales and I love The Box because I think what he's so focused on is, like, the soul, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? The soul and how technology grants us access to the soul and also pulls us away from the soul, and that push and pull is what attracts him to stories. Um, and I think that when you're a comedian, when you're a Sherry O'Terry, or when you're Dwayne The Rock Johnson, who's known for, I mean, these people are living their life in what they consider to be satire. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And it must be difficult for people to not see the meaning in what you do. Um, like wrestling is another one of my favorite things in the world. Like I think wrestling is like right behind jazz, the greatest art form that America has given the world, wrestling entertainment. You know what I mean? It's so wonderfully theatrical. And in this era where like, you've got like, what everyone, classifies as like, redneck, alt right, white trash standing in a crowd, of thousands cheering on Finn Balor as he wiggles his package in front of you in his leather jacket with his, it makes you stand up and push your hands in the air, you know what I mean? Like RuPaul style. And you've got thousands of white trash rednecks doing that with you. I mean, how do you not see the artistry there? How do you not see, you know what I mean? That like,
Bringing
and
it back to Idiocracy.
right. Well, but I mean to say that like these people like what The Rock was doing. I mean, these are artists.
Sure.
And Southland Tales, I think what Richard Kelly was trying to do was he was trying to offer them a platform where they could do what they do best, which is satire, which is
Hmm.
theatricality, but he allowed them to inject it with sincerity. And I think
Hmm.
if any of them fall short, I think it's because they haven't been given that opportunity before, and so they're still a little green at it.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And um, I actually think that Sean William Scott too gives an award-worthy performance in this movie. I think he
Yeah.
he he is so beautifully realized as both of his characters, Donald and Ronald. um, um, yeah, so I think that like, and Saturday Night Live, it now more than ever is known for how satirical it can be. You know what I mean? It fancies itself as an intellectual property anymore. Um,
Hmm.
but this was like before all of that, and I think that Richard Kelly saw that in them, and he wanted to do something new with them, and I think that he got it. I mean, it is new.
Yeah, it sure is.
I met Sherry O'Terry at the movie theater I was working at one time, and I was like, pouring her a Coke or whatever, and she was like, I was like, I fucking love Southland Tales. She goes, "Oh no, you do not." And I was like, "No, I really do. I adore that movie." She goes, "Okay, well then you're one of two." And I was like, "Who is the other one?" She's like, "Marilyn Manson." And she walked away.
There you go. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a good story. Well, I'll go to another piece, and this one I've already been talking about all the little futuristic details and stuff like that. But I also just thought of Demolition Man and
Mm,
just all of the little extra technological advances and weird technological things and ideas that are being thrown in. And a lot of them feel very real, especially when think 2006 to now and things that have happened. But then a lot of them are just totally, kind of a ridiculous version of the future that, where does that even come from? It's just like a total kind of a comic book version of the future.
right.
But that's always been a movie where I haven't seen it in many years, but the thing that always stood out to me was just the inventiveness of like all of the little futuristic ideas in it.
Yeah, no, Demolition Man, one of the truly beautiful things about that movie is that it has no consideration for, logic or function
Right.
in its future, and I mean that as a positive. Like, the infamous
Yeah.
joke of, like, he doesn't know how to use the 3 seashells to wipe his ass. It's like, "What are you
Yeah.
talking about?" Neither does the person who made this movie, you know what I mean? They
Right.
don't have any consideration for the functionality of the world that they created, and that is a beautiful thing because it is
Right.
so consistently stupid that, but it's stupid in the best way, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Um, that you get to, like, focus on what their intention was, which was to thrill, which was to
Mhm.
excite and entertain. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, but, like, we already complained about how expensive it is to put criminals in prison, but when that movie came out, it was, like, 3 years in the future. Now we're, like, cryo freezing people and storing them for 30 years, and then and then implanting them with, like, rehabilitation things, like being able to knit and shit like that. It's like, what? Like, no.
It's fun to dream, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, no, hey, that's actually a beautiful way to put it. That's great. My favorite part of that whole movie is when they're fighting in the museum and they fall into, like, a little pit from, like that's, like, a preserved section of the earthquake that tore Los Angeles apart, and there's,
Mhm.
like, a TV down there, and he takes it and he throws it at Wesley Snipes, and he goes, "You're on TV." I lo
That's fucking great.
Yeah, it is.
Oh
Yeah.
my god. Alright, what do you got
I
next?
find it really interesting that, like, I didn't even think of any of these that you're talking about, and, like, it makes so much sense, and it also kind of makes even more sense as to why, A, people didn't know what to do with this movie when it came out, and B, people did like, it's interesting the through line that you're creating here with your pieces. It's really blowing my mind because these ideas are so clear and so
Mhm.
simple that everyone has kind of like um, embraced them. Every movie you've mentioned has a huge following,
Right,
and
right.
and like and that following is all like they're all the same people, like the same people who like Idiocracy, like the Demolition Man, like um, they live. I'm speaking in generalities, but that's interesting. And yet, things haven't changed since
Mhm.
any of those movies came out. If anything, those movies only seem to like affirm the beliefs of people who already believed it, and almost acted as a way to pacify them from, like, continuing to search. Because
That's
after
really
those
interesting.
films, now they feel validated.
Mhm.
But I don't mean that as a criticism of them either or the films themselves. I think that, like, maybe one of the, hard things for Southland Tales that it, like, didn't that, like, maybe where it might fall short, um, I say maybe might because I really love the movie. I can
Mhm.
if anybody tells me they hate it, I go, "Yeah, then no, yes, that makes perfect sense. Yes, Wallace Shawn and
Sure.
Curtis Armstrong are the main villains in this movie." Yeah, I get that. Um, but, um, but maybe, like, there has to be a better balance. Where Southland Tales falls short is that I don't think it needed to be more clear unless if it wouldn't have had to be more clear if it had been a little more clear story-wise, maybe. If it had been a little
Mm.
cleaner and a little more to the point story-wise, but how can you probe the soul if you do that? And I'm not saying you can't, I'm not saying that as, like, it's impossible, but like that's a tough thing to figure out. And good for Richard Kelly to out of Donnie Darko was basically an independent film, and so after that minor hit, he went, well, they'll never let me do this again. So here we
Yeah,
go.
right?
But my last piece that I had on here, I wanted it to be "Kiss Me Deadly" because, like, I've heard him talk about that being an influence, and it plays in the movie at the beginning.
Mhm,
Kristen now she's watching the scene from "Kiss Me Deadly," but I don't really like that movie,
mhm,
and I've never been able to finish it, so I can't really speak to why it influenced him. Um, so my last piece is I'm calling it the Gold Star Robert Altman collection,
mm,
um, where and what I mean by that is Robert Altman is one of my favorite filmmakers, and if you're not familiar with his work, he was he made ensemble movies that were they were more character driven than story driven, um, and some were more successful than others. But his biggest hits were movies like MASH, Nashville, The Player, and Shortcuts. You could also say that Gosford Park was a big hit as well. So I call those the gold star. Those are the ones that like critically were acclaimed awards and like audiences really connected with them.
mhm,
Um, and I think each one of those has an influence in Southland Tales. With MASH, you have this idea. This is kind of a cheat puzzle piece. It's like
sure.
I think of it as how AIM. You remember AIM? That was my favorite acronym because it was AOL Instant Messenger, which meant that it had an acronym within the acronym because AOL is America Online. So like that's what this is. MASH was set during the Korean War, but it was an obvious metaphor for the Vietnam War, right? Like they
Mhm,
were they were trying to make people think it was the Vietnam War. This war in Southland Tales, they're calling it the Iraq War, but it's like this alternate weird Iraq War that happened after the one we were currently in, where people were drafted. You know what I mean? So it blurs the line between reality and its reality of what war we're talking about.
mhm,
Um, then you've got Nashville, which specifically deals with the idea of celebrity, you know what I mean? And
sure.
like a hodgepodge of politically charged celebrity. You've got all these Nashville simple-minded folk, that like are trying to keep America pure, right? So
Mhm,
that line of entertainment and politics mashing together. Um, then you have The Player, which if you haven't seen The Player, it's about a studio executive who accidentally murders a screenwriter and is trying to cover it up. And it's all about, his, like, survival of image and his soul search of being an artist or not, whether he'll cave into the evils and the manipulation of Hollywood, much like The Rock's character.
sure.
Then you've got Gosford Park, which is a dealing of class systems, you know what I mean? Like, 2 class systems that totally ignore that each other exists because they look at each other as just an inconvenience when one feeds the other. So all these resentments are building up without people even knowing it. And in Gosford Park, there's a murder. It's a murder mystery, but you don't even know if it was a murder or not. Like, that's part of the confusion because there's no
Yeah.
communication between classes. And then finally, you have Shortcuts, which is this sprawling look at specifically Los Angeles and the inner workings and how people who think that they're totally disconnected can have an impact on each other. And even when they don't impact each other, it kind of points out how these what we think are meaningless crosses in life that we come to, like encounters that we have, like who knows who those people are? You know what I mean? And
Right.
Shortcuts and Southland Tales both do that, where like just because two characters in these movies meet doesn't mean that we know anything about like that they know anything about each other, but we know
Mhm,
something about them. So they're helping us understand that everything has a purpose and that there is some kind of weird design to the universe. Like
hmm.
Christopher Lambert in the ice cream truck. Him kidnapping Sean William Scott halfway through the movie has nothing to do with Sherry O'Terry beating his ass because he won't take a check earlier
Right.
in the movie.
Right.
You know what I mean? Um, you could not have that scene with him and Sherry O'Terry, and the movie wouldn't be any different story wise necessarily.
Mhm,
That scene about him and Sherry O'Terry is for Sherry O'Terry, is for her character, for you to understand
sure.
what she's going through, not necessarily him. And as a filmmaker, what excites me is when people um, draw those lines. I love seeing those paths cross and cross again, as Patti Smith said. I think that that's how you create understanding rather
Mm.
than wagging a finger in somebody's face or pointing the finger away from yourself like They Live does. Like,
Mm.
you know, yeah.
That's a interesting run of movies, and like all those little bits and pieces that all come together in this just show how like densely packed this movie is to
Dense.
really be dealing with all of that.
Dense is the right word.
Yeah,
It's
I think so.
sorry, that was when I thought of the 5-star Altman thing, I didn't realize that it was a cheat until I was like saying it. I was like, "Oh, this is cheating. This is
It
this is
works for me.
oh, great. Great."
Well, I'll go ahead and do the finished puzzle, and then we'll look at some movies that came since Southland Tales that maybe were inspired by it. So we just talked about RoboCop 2, They Live, Star Wars, Idiocracy, Saturday Night Live, Demolition Man, and a bunch of Robert Altman movies, MASH, Nashville, The Player, Gosford Park, Shortcuts. Why don't we jump into looking forward? What do you have as far as things that maybe, obviously this is such a strange movie, a weird cult thing, not a lot of people connected with it, but it had to inspire some stuff. Is there anything that you thought of that might have been inspired by it?
It's funny, the only thing that I could think of, that I've seen in a theater is, Her, like, has a slight, like, aesthetic influence from this movie,
Hmm.
um, but I think that Her is also, kind of a shallow, silly movie. Um,
Hmm.
I don't really care for that movie. To be honest, I worried about this question because I didn't wanna sound vain, but the only influence I can see that this movie had on other movies is in my movies.
All
Like
right. I like
like
it.
like, I and I don't mean that to say, like, like, I don't mean that to, like, self-promote or brag or anything. Because I mean, to brag that you're influenced by Southland Tales is an insane thing to say. Um,
You like Southland Tales? Come watch my movies.
yeah, "Oh, you like Southland Tales? Wait till you get a load of me." Uh, no, Southland Tales, Richard Kelly to me is kind of a hero, um, because, especially after Domino, which came out before this, he didn't direct that, but he wrote it. He was tasked with writing a script about, a supermodel who becomes a bounty hunter.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, that was the movie, and he turned it into this beautiful film about, like, women's rights and about, immigration and about you know what I mean? Like, he really went for this complex, crazy, meaningful film, and
Mhm.
God bless Tony Scott for going, "Yeah, this is the version I wanna do." Um, but Richard Kelly, what I love the most about Southland Tales is how unafraid it is to be silly because it understood that silly didn't mean stupid or dumb or invalid,
Mhm.
and how it brilliantly balances silly and sincere. I love how much faith it has in its audience. Some could argue, even me, even though I love it, that it had too much faith in its audience,
Mm.
which is a criticism of the film, not of the audience. Um, and I love that he obviously had so much on his mind and so much in his heart, and that he had all these different characters and storylines coming together. And I think the reason why, as my buddy who edited the movie said, it started out as this one little idea and why it germed into what it was because he cared so much and he wanted to see something new. And so,
Mm.
like, in my movies, like, what I've leaned into, especially in the last, like, 5 years or so, is my movies really go out of their way, and I'm not bragging when I say this, like, I'm just, like,
Mhm.
explaining what I'm trying to get at in my films. They really go out of their way. If there's a point or purpose to any of my movies, it's not to tell a morality tale or to give you a message. All my movies, I'm trying to create understanding
Mhm.
and understand and not even understanding of who someone is, but just the understanding that everyone is someone.
Mhm.
Like, so, like, I have a movie about I had it and it's funny, I made this movie before meeting the editor, so before knowing what Southland Tales started out as, but I made a movie called Lowtown that was supposed to be about, a guy who was filming B-roll for a stupid, like, horror movie or something, gets caught up in a diamond heist and taken hostage, but he has
Hmm.
footage of the diamond heist, and, like, he escapes with one of the people who double crossed all the other people in the diamond heist. So they're gonna go disappear to his hometown in Florida and like hide with the diamonds so they can sell them off using the tape as like, their
Nice.
security so that the bad guys won't find them, right? It was, a simple idea. And I sat down to write that movie. And a day into it, I was like, I've seen this movie. You know what I mean? I've seen like, you know what I mean? Like I've seen that movie before. And so it just germed into this thing that ended up being a 158-page screenplay that
Whew.
because I got so invested in who is this cinematographer and who is this jewel thief, actress, and who how did they become this, and who are the people that this would affect, and
Sure.
who are the people that this would affect indirectly. And I became obsessed with that, and we made a 158-page uh fish out of water diamond heist comedy for $40,000, and we shot it in 10 days. And every single person who's seen that movie, which of my movies, that's probably the most viewed movie.
Mhm.
Um, every single person who's seen it, we got some good criticism. We got some, and we had a really positive response from about half. But I can't tell you how many times people have come back to me and said, "Dude, it was so much better the second time." Like it was, and so Southland Tales to me is a pioneer. It's a first through the gates, you know what I mean? And I wish that I knew other influences that I could reference. I'm hoping to
Mm.
hear ones from you because like your puzzle pieces blew my mind.
Right on. Well, I do have 2.
Okay.
So, yeah, we'll jump into mine then. First one I wanted to bring up, he obviously had a cameo in the movie. It's Kevin Smith,
Hmm.
and basically all of his movies after Red State.
Mm.
Just leaning into his own crazier ideas that maybe don't necessarily make sense to anyone but him, but he's just going for it, and adding in all these political elements, these crazier elements, and just really not worrying so much about whether or not the audience is going to follow him into the idea that he had, more so worried about telling some kind of story that he has in mind and really kind of digging in.
Tusk is, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I don't know how I didn't even think of that because Richard Kelly is the one who influenced him to make Red State.
Yeah.
Um, but because they're actually pretty good friends. But Tusk, the problem with Kevin Smith versus Richard Kelly, I think they both have the same problem, but on different sides of the spectrum. Richard
Hmm.
Kelly is thinking about it way too much and spending way too much time figuring it out. You know what I mean? Like he's more interested in like what he's figuring out, what he's discovering rather. And Kevin
Hmm.
Smith doesn't care. Like,
Right.
but like,
I think that's fair.
yeah, like I remember when I feel like I name drop too much on this podcast, but I live in Los Angeles. I've
Right.
gotten to work with Kevin Smith, and it was right after Tusk, and I
Hmm.
was talking to him about it, and he was like, "What'd you think? It's weird, right?" And I said, "Oh, it was very effective." And he like this blank look just like washed over his face, just like a huh, like because I think that Tusk is a masterpiece. Like I really do. And Tusk is, you're right, very similar. It's silly, but it's sincere. You know what I mean? And it gets
Hmm.
to, but he's not thinking about it. He's just kind of like he took the surface of Southland Tales.
Yeah, weird is a great starting point. It's like, where do you go from there?
Right, right. And Tusk
Yeah.
is just like I think that Red State too starts out brilliantly because it's what Kevin Smith knows. He knows being a horny teenager and he knows religion. But then when it gets into that second half where it totally deviates from anything he's ever come close to doing before. It just you can tell it's from a guy who's seen a lot of Law and Order. You know what I
Right.
mean? Who doesn't know what he's talking about and hasn't thought it through. And I feel like the ending is so lame
Mhm.
to Red State. Um, but then Tusk was this brilliant, wonderful, transcendent movie. And then Yoga Hosers was just back to like the nonsense.
Yeah, Yoga Hosers,
It's
man,
the worst movie. It's
it's
so
so
bad.
bad.
It's so bad. And like offensively bad because that movie cost like fucking $10 million to make. And it's like, man, do you know how many other artists could have benefited from that? You didn't, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? if you want to make a vanity movie for your fucking kids, like that's fine. Robert Rodriguez did that for 10 years, and those are pretty good movies. But like,
Mhm.
you've got to try. You can't just
Yeah.
like, you know, man, that just made me
Oh.
sad.
Well, I have no idea how you feel about my other one that I was going to bring up, so I might as well jump into it and see what you have to say. But it's another movie that we've done on the podcast that They Live was a puzzle piece for. It is Boots Riley's "Sorry to Bother You." Did you like that movie?
No,
No,
no.
I
But
I
yeah, I see what
felt
you're talking about. 100%.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I felt mixed on it. I think it has some interesting ideas. I appreciate the craziness of it. I didn't think it was 100% successful as a movie, but yeah, as you can agree, there's just so much crazy and like it crazy as a starting point of where to really like pick up this story and try to dig into some like really interesting ideas, but maybe not necessarily getting there, especially not if you're not fully invested in the story and everything that's happening. It's going to be really difficult to really find the meaning in all of it. But it's an interesting movie though, and I am really interested to see what else Boots Riley has to say in a future movie. I think it's an interesting debut, but yeah, not necessarily the most successful movie though.
I went to an early screening of that. It was the last film they ever did as the Film Independent series at LACMA.
Mhm.
So I went to a screening of it about a month before it came out, and it was I was really looking forward to it because I love Lakeith Stanfield and Armie Hammer
Oh
so
yeah,
much, and
Armie Hammer's great in it, by the
he's
way.
fucking brilliant in it. That's the role Ben Affleck would have played 10 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Uh, but when I was watching it, all I was thinking, very similarly to what I was saying about Kevin Smith's, work recently, that it's like it's kind of thoughtless. It's
Hmm.
nothing but sensational complaining. And Boots Riley did a Q&A afterward with Elvis Mitchell, which basically is to say that Boots Riley sat there while Elvis Mitchell talked at him for an hour and a half because Elvis Mitchell is there for Elvis Mitchell. But what blew my mind was that Elvis Mitchell was saying things like, "I love how you brilliantly set up the character like to seem like he's in animal cages the whole time. You know, he becomes a horse at the end, but like at the beginning, he literally lives in a garage which is framed like a stable, and then you see him framed in a bullpen like like an animal, blah blah blah." And as Elvis Mitchell was saying that, I was like, "Wow, I didn't catch that." You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Which is odd because that's how I view films, you know what I mean? I view it through that lens. Obviously, I like Southland Tales. And I was like, how was I missing that? How was I And then after Elvis Mitchell got done talking about it, Boots Riley goes, "Oh shit, I didn't even think of that. That is crazy, isn't it?" And I was like, "Are you kidding?" I thought maybe he was joking, right? Like,
Hmm.
but then later on, Elvis is talking about Lakeith Stanfield's performance and how brilliant it is, which it is.
Hmm.
Um, he's Lakeith Stanfield is the most underrated person in
I love him.
mainstream entertainment today. He's brilliant. Um, and the nicest guy in the world. But he was praising his performance, and then Boots is like, "Yeah, Lakeith, he's just crazy. He's just one of those actors that just, man, he just takes that shit too seriously." Like he was telling me when he points at his uncle at the beginning, he was like, "Boots, I have an idea. When I'm pointing at my uncle, telling him off, I feel like the problem with the character is that he's so non-committal that he can't actually point at his uncle. He won't even commit to pointing at his uncle completely. So I kind of want to bend my finger so that I'm not pointing directly at him because I can't even commit to the idea." And
Mm-hmm.
then Boots is like, and I was just like, "Man, that's some actor shit. Do whatever you want. That don't matter to me." And I was like, "What? That's
Oh.
brilliant. He's thinking about it. He's giving
Hmm.
you fucking gold, man. Like he's adding that layer that you need when you're doing something like that. Otherwise, you're just jerking off. You know what I mean? And like, God, like it was so,
It's interesting. I didn't even think when I put these two together how close it is to the Kevin Smith thing of like starting at crazy but not going anywhere with it, you
right,
know?
right. And
Yeah.
Tusk was a happy accident, unfortunately, is what we've discovered. You know what I mean? Like it was a
Hmm.
happy accident. but like, but yeah, sorry to bother you. What really bothered me about it was that it's again kind of like I was talking about with an idea like Groundhog Day or Idiocracy, where it's such an like such a great idea and an important idea, especially for when it was made, right?
Mhm.
Like, you have to be more responsible. You have to be more considerate. You have to be more thoughtful. You have to have more purpose.
Especially
Why?
because no one else is gonna make that movie.
Right, and why are you doing it? Why are you doing it
Yeah.
if not, and the answer becomes for yourself or for money, right?
Mhm.
Which directly relates to yourself. I remember when I went to that LACMA screening, I was a little thrown off and confused. It's like, here's a bunch of people in line for this movie, and they're all wearing, like, Malcolm X pins and Spike Lee T-shirts, and this was right at the beginning of Black Lives Matter movement, like, they were and I remember feeling like it felt more like being in the line for a pre-screening of Batman and
Hmm.
everybody wearing their Batman masks and paraphernalia. It didn't feel like an actual, like, movement. It felt very empty and vain in a certain way. Like, maybe that's
Hmm.
being hypercritical, but, like, it did, like, kinda jar me at the beginning, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, but again, what's interesting about that movie too is, like, how much it was hyped up and then how quickly it's kind of faded into obscurity.
Mhm.
Like, there isn't that fan base like Idiocracy has or like, They Live has, you know what I mean? Like, there's
Sure.
Sorry to Bother You really faded very quickly, which is a shame because it's a brilliant idea with a brilliant, important, like, uh, an important message and at the right time, and it just came across to me as a vanity project that
Hmm.
wasn't interested in telling for all its flaws, Southland Tales may be, may be a little incoherent, but it's there are no plot holes. You know what I mean? There's no it's not inconsistent. It's not poorly thought out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's all there.
Exactly. And I think that Sorry to Bother You, just even on a narrative platform. I don't and him becoming the horse at the end, it's like, what are you saying with that? Like, what are
Mhm.
you saying with him becoming the horse at the end after finding what was the cure for it and taking down the corporation that did it? Like, so are you saying that, like, but then the horse for some reason is still fighting the fight, but it's like, what does him becoming this horse hybrid person do? Like, is that a message of hopelessness? Like, I don't understand, you
Yeah.
know? And I would maybe trust the movie more, and I would have gone back and had a second look at it. You know what I mean? Because I like to
Mhm.
pick things. I like to sift through things. I won't say pick things apart, but I like to sift through them because, as they say, gold diggers mine mostly for rocks and sand. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So, like, I don't mind panning. I really don't. But after hearing Boots Riley talk about it, I was like, oh, like, you have nothing to say.
That's interesting. Yeah, I seriously, like, if especially the weirder the concept, the more they've gotta be all in on it 100% for it
Mhm.
to really drive it home.
If I had been on the Sorry to Bother You, I would have used Groundhog Day as a puzzle piece. If
Nice.
you had another movie that just like, this is the best idea for a movie ever, and what did you do with it? Nothing. Fuck you. And they just recently released that Bill Murray's supposed to have been in that day for 10,000 years to the day. Dude, after
Mhm.
10,000 years, if you're still like pining after Andy McDowell, like if you have not like gained any kind of like wisdom beyond like spiritual wisdom, it just nonsense.
Is that true?
Nonsense.
Is that what they say? 10,000 years?
Even
Really?
if it's even if it's a fucking 10-year, difference. 10 years like in that movie they're saying theoretically that he's read every book in that library twice. Every book in that library. He's mastered sculpting ice, he's mastered the piano. He knows every single thing about that town to the second. And we see that montage where he like kills himself a million different times, right? Where's the
Mhm.
fucking scene where he kills somebody else? You know what I mean? Go there.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to go and some of it's a little bit of the time, but like what we have to slowly open our mind, like a big problem that people have understanding what real change is. Change takes time.
Mm.
Unfortunately, it takes patience. It takes um and it takes repetition. You know what I mean? It,
Mhm.
it takes a lot of it requires a lot to create real change. One of the reasons I think that we're seeing such a problem in the world right now with everything that's going on, well, in our country at the very least with what's going on, is because we're doing the same thing that we did 50 years ago, like citing how it affected change. Like it changed laws, it gave people rights and stuff like that, right? But here's the
Mm,
thing, it didn't actually change a consciousness.
right.
It just shifted us economically. It shifted, you know what I mean? And so that's an important thing that needs to happen,
Yeah.
and that happened, but now we have to, like, and unfortunately, and yeah, it's so sad what people have to go through in this country, in this world. It really is the worst, but you have to create understanding if you want it to go away. I think that, like, part of the language, this is getting a little too political maybe, but, like, Southland Tales, if this is not, I don't think that the right answer is we're not fighting racists, we're fighting racism.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like that's the new frontier. The new frontier is conquering racism.
Right.
And I don't have a solution for it. So I'm not dare telling people what they should or shouldn't be doing necessarily. But like
Right.
but I can't help but say that, like, I don't know, maybe if Groundhog's Day had dared to show Bill Murray killing somebody else and
It
we
was
had,
a big change right
well,
there.
but no, but
Mm.
seriously, you know what I mean? Like
No, yeah.
yeah, it's there is a responsibility when it comes to art, and as much as art doesn't want to admit it, entertainment is art. See, most people think I would say the opposite there, where entertainment won't admit that it's art. No, art won't admit that it's entertainment. Like
Hmm.
that's the truth. That art has always been a conversation through abstract. You know
Mm.
what I mean? It's always been a lot of artists will call filmmaking, especially, they'll say art is a mirror to hold up to society. I don't agree with that. I think that that's
Mm.
absolutely incorrect. I think that art is a lens for society to look through, not
Mm.
at. You know what I mean? And and I think that now more than ever, like, in 1991 or whatever, when Groundhog Day came out, was it 1990, something like that?
I
You
think so.
you couldn't really do that much, and as much as I hate people like Christopher Nolan and Spike Jonze, they really did, like, push things in a direction where you can do more now. You know what I mean? They
Mhm.
open those doors a little bit more. I mean, there's plenty of other people, but those are just the first 2 that come to mind. Um, so, like, we as artists, we have the opportunity to step up. We have more opportunity now than ever to speak in an abstract, creative, and thoughtful, meaningful way. Richard Kelly did it a little too crazy for people, I guess. But that's why I get so frustrated when I see things that come out today when people just aren't trying, like, you can make movies for less, you can make movies easier, but I guess what they're proving is that easy isn't always the right thing.
That's right.
Was it Jeff Goldblum, Jurassic Park? You spent too much time saying, "Can we?" and not enough time asking, "Should we?"
Wanna put that directly at Kevin Smith and, see
Mhm.
see what
This is a rare
happens.
podcast you have me on where I'm, like, giving credit to Christopher Nolan, Spike Jonze, and Steven Spielberg all in the same
This is a
podcast,
very positive conversation. I
which
like it.
for me saying nice things about those 3 quote unquote "gentlemen" is, my friends won't believe it.
Well, Joe, I think we pretty much covered Southland Tales as much as you can in a 1-hour conversation. Is there another movie you watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Oh man, I saw this movie, Going in Style. Uh, it was made by Martin Brest, who did Beverly Hills Cop and Meet Joe Black and Geely, but don't hold that against him. It was his first film. It's got Art Carney and and George Burns. It's about 3 old men who just are tired of, like, they just wake up one day kind of bored with their routine and they decide to rob a bank.
Mhm.
But it's a very lackadaisical movie. It's not a heist movie because they rob the bank a half hour into it, and then they're just like, "Okay, so we got this money," and, it's so beautifully heartfelt. I doubt any of your listeners will watch it, but man, if they do, they're in for a real treat. Going
Wasn't it just remade like a year ago, I think?
I think I posted this on our on the group page, that remake is the most offensive, stupid
Ugh,
remake. Because
it looked so bad.
it's so in the remake, they give them, like, motive to do it, like, the bank is going to foreclose on Michael Caine's house, and
Of
that same
course.
bank took away their pension because it bought out their company, so, like, You know what I mean? So it's like a revenge heist, and like one of them has like an illness that they have to cure, and they don't have money for medical
Mhm.
insurance, and blah 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 blah. Nah, dude. The genius of the original premise is that it's literally a film about old people being like, you don't think of us as people.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Like we're not people don't even notice us as anything other than old men. So fuck it. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Half the like a good chunk of the movie is just them at a casino gambling the money and just winning a ton. And then it means nothing to them outside of like, "Isn't that crazy? We just
Yeah,
flipped
that
30 we
rules.
flipped 30,000 into $105,000. That's cool. Let's go home." You know, and
Yeah.
I love that. I that remake, garbage, garbage, just offensive. Don't watch the
Well,
remake.
do not watch the remake, absolutely, but maybe watch the original. It sounds fun.
Yeah.
So, Joe, where can people find you and your work?
Okay, so I don't know when you're releasing this, but I assume it's gonna be after Thursday. Um,
Yeah, it'll be sometime in June. So, yeah, we got a little bit to go, but
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so right now, folks, if you're listening in June, um, I finally completed my year and a half long journey of getting all 14 or 15 now of my feature length films onto Blu-ray. Um, and you can go to the Blue Means Pregnant Facebook page, and you can see our campaign to raise money for the manufacturing. You can also see clips, trailers, posters for all of the work. I've also put together like a video that has um, one shot of every single face that has ever been in front of the camera on one of my films. There's like
hmm,
it's a 5-minute video with hundreds of faces, just and you get
that
to
must
see.
be a lot.
Oh, it's beautiful. Like it was so beautiful to do. I'm not a nostalgic person, but just to realize the scope of what because it's not just me in this company, it's a bunch of us, what we have done, in the last 16 years we've been doing this. And
Yeah.
like I just want to invite people to at least celebrate with us, you know what I mean, if not become a part of it. But yeah, the Blue Means Pregnant Films Facebook page, and there will be a website a link there soon too. We would love to share our work with you, and love to hear your thoughts.
Awesome. I'll put a link to the fundraiser in the show notes of the episode.
Sick. Thank you. That really
Awesome.
means a lot.
For sure. Well, Joe, as always, great having you on. Some great stories there.
Oh,
And I'm glad we finally got to do this one.
same.
Hello, welcome to the All Points West Podcast Network. This is Q. June is going to be huge for us. We're starting the month off with the launch of House on Fire, a podcast hosted by youth climate activists JP Mejia and Gabby Rodriguez, and presented in partnership with the Clio Institute and Unicorn Fire Radio. We're talking climate change from the front lines of the crisis, Miami, with the generation who has the most at stake. In their first episode, JP and Gabby talked to the co-founder of Zero Hour, Jamie Margolin, about how Generation Z is taking up the mantle for action on global warming and what it means for the near future. The first 4 episodes are up on June 5th with more to come every other week, so be sure to subscribe, rate, and review now. Meanwhile, over on Awesome Movie Year, Jason Harris and Josh Bell are reviewing the year in film 1996, including Swingers, Welcome to the Dollhouse, Bottle Rocket, Independence Day, and more. They've got some awesome bonus content they'll be releasing later this month, but you need to subscribe to find out what it is. And over on Entre Dos, Monica and Paula are getting deep into the world of language rights and how parents can push for better bilingual programs in their communities. So check it out by subscribing today.
All right. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Southland Tales. It was a fun one to do. And thanks, Joe Black, for joining me again on the show. You should go check out his fundraiser that he's got going on right now for his Blu-ray reissues of all of his films. I'll put a link in the show notes for that. And that does it for today. You can, of course, support the show by following us on social media at PiecingPod, join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, or just, subscribe to the show wherever it is you listen to podcasts. You can rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. And we also have a Patreon where you may have already heard this episode because it's been up for a couple weeks now since we first recorded it. We usually post the episodes early on there, and then they hit the main feed. So if you're hearing it on the main feed, then it's on on the main feed, but a lot of these episodes do go up early over on the Patreon, and we are planning on recording a whole bunch of other bonus content for that Patreon soon, as well as some special exclusive music stuff that I'm planning on putting out there soon as well. So check out the Patreon/PiecingPod to, maybe throw some support that way as well. And if you're ever interested in joining me for an episode, we've got a lot of movies coming up that we're hoping to cover and always looking for new co-hosts. And also we got a lot of episodes on the way, by the way. We've got a couple of special interview episodes hitting in the next couple of weeks, a couple of other kinds of special episodes, special middle of the year countdown kind of thing, even though it's been a really weird year. And of course, just covering more new movies, some of the stuff that's been hitting streaming and that stuff. So lots coming your way. So let's close this thing out. This is a long one, over an hour and 10 minutes already. Jeez. Well, let's close this thing off with a piece of music as we always do. And I think it's been a while since I played this one, if I've ever played it. I probably did at some point, but this was the title track from my last album, my last regular full-length album, A Different Kind of Dream. It is called A Different Kind of Dream. I love this track. It's a weird one, and so I think that makes it a good fit for Southland Tales. So let's close it out with A Different Kind of Dream. This album is available on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to music. And we'll be back with more Piecing It Together coming up next week.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.